I'm Katie.
And I'm Steve, and this is the City of Redding podcast. The Redding Civic Auditorium, built in 1970, is a unique venue that caters to concert-goers, trade show attendees, banquets, and much more. Flex seating allows the capacity to change based on the size or style of the event. Even though it serves many entertainment functions in our community, the Civic sometimes doesn't get the credit it deserves.
Today, we talk with Julie Dyar, General Manager of the Redding Civic Auditorium. And while she admits that the design of the building is polarizing, she believes the foresight and the flex seating capacity is just one of the elements that has made the venue last as long as it has in our community. We'll also find out what it takes to book a show, what makes Redding a good market, and how ticket prices are calculated. She'll also dispel a few longstanding myths about who runs and owns the Civic.
There are a ton of exciting acts hitting the Redding Civic Auditorium soon, including the biggest outdoor stage ever to grace the Civic this fall. With more to come in the next year, there has never been a better time to check out all the great shows coming to our area.
My name is Julie Dyar. I am the General Manager / Executive Director of Advance Redding, which is the management company that manages the Redding Civic Auditorium.
Thanks, Julie, for being with us here today. We are really excited to talk to you because there are a ton of really amazing things going on at the Civic right now. And so we thought this was a great time to bring you on and have you discuss a little bit about what's happening, what has happened this summer, what's coming up this fall. And then maybe just to help the community understand a little bit more about the Redding Civic Auditorium and Advance Redding. I think both of those terms they hear interchangeably. And I don't know that people fully understand exactly how the city is managed, run, owned, operated. So let's start there. Can you give us a history behind the Redding Civic Auditorium, a little bit about Advance Redding and how that organization runs today?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I get to talk about one of my favorite things. So this is fun for me. So the history on the venue itself is the facility was open to the public in 1970. The very first artist to play the stage was Ray Charles. And there's a fun little story. Steve Williams, who's Interwest Insurance here in town, it was his grandfather, Carl A. Williams, who really championed the idea of, he was championing a 3,000 seat performing arts center or auditorium back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Like he ran this thing to ground. And so we sit here today, actually really the beneficiaries of a 100-year vision that he had for this community. And I just find that tons of fun. And I find a sense of placemaking out of it for myself as an individual and for our community. Because 3,000 seats was a lot of seats for the size Redding was back in those days. It would be a lot of seats even, for today. He had big ideas. He's why we have the form of city government we do. He was also the idea guy behind the promenade when Market Street went that way, that, now we've undone that. So Carl Williams had a lot of impact on our city. So the facility was run and operated by the city of Redding directly for all of its life until 2012 when Advance Redding took over management. And what was happening in those days is, the Great Recession had some significant impacts on the Redding community. Recovery was a longer arc than in other places. And so the city, facing some significant budget shortfalls, was facing, do we lay off police officers or do we shutter this venue that's costing us, anywhere from $800,000 to $1.4 million a year to run and operate. And so conversations were happening in the community about just shuttering it. Does it get bulldozed? What? And in the course of that conversation, ultimately the city decided to go out to RFP to see if there was anyone else interested in managing the facility for them. And out of that discussion time frame, Advance Redding was born. And it was born out of the idea of trying to meet the city's needs first and foremost and not shuttering the facility. But then also, if there was someone else managing it, could this facility also serve as meeting a need for the Bethel School because they had outgrown their main campus? And so Advance Redding was formed initially out of that idea. And it was formed by some core members of Bethel Church, but it has never been a Bethel organization. So I know that's sometimes hard for people to delineate, but it has never been under the control of the church. It's never been dictated to by the church. The way the whole structure has always worked is Advance Redding leases the facility from the city of Redding. The city has always owned the facility. No one else has ever owned it. We lease it from the city of Redding, and then Bethel, while they were in for school, they leased the facility from us. But the long-term vision was always for Advanced Reading specifically. The assignment was actually about finding an operational model that would mean long-term longevity for the venue long after Bethel no longer occupied the facility, because they knew they were going to build a new campus, like all those things going on. There was never an intent for them to be permanent occupants of the space. The first assignment was like, okay, finding out, like, how does this beast actually run in a market like ours, where it runs, those kinds of things. Then once we got that done, then what does the transition look like with moving away from having a big anchor tenant into just event running? And then now here we are today. I don't know. Some of your listeners may not know that Bethel is not going to be back in the building this fall. Their lease with us ended in July. And so we are now in the brave new world of the facility running as it was intended, as a multi-purpose facility.
Fascinating. Julie, I didn't realize it had opened in 1970. How much did it cost when it was constructed? And was it funded through bonds or tax increase?
It was. Yeah, there was a bond initiative attached to it. I don't know the full scope of that. But it was, listen, the Civic has always been a lightning rod of controversy. Yeah, from its inception. So Carl Williams, who had this grand idea, hated the fact that this was the location that it landed on. So there's even those kind of points of contention. But it started off, I believe the initial budget was like $1.2 million for the total build. It went over budget. No one is surprised, right? Because that's how construction always goes, especially when a government that's involved in the process. Because governments have different rules, which crank the prices up. The final number, I believe, it's either 2.6 or $2.3 million of what the total build cost was new. And yeah, the bond initiatives, I think it's either 2024 or 2026, the city's obligations for those initial bond requirements are finished.
Has it always been called the Civic Auditorium, or where did that name originate from?
That was actually the original name. So somewhere back in the 90s, when the council sitting at that time was hoping to capitalize on conference and meeting business, it got rebranded as the Redding Convention Center. But the facility is not actually really designed to be a true convention center. You can do some meetings and some kinds of things here, but it's really not truly designed for that function. So when we came in to manage it, we actually returned it to its original name, which another Carl Williams story. So he actually changed his name to Carl A. Williams, so that when people would ask him what the A stood for, he could say auditorium.
Oh, that's hilarious.
That's awesome.
This might be a good time in the conversation to actually talk about the venue itself. Like, how many seats does it hold? I know the Civic is a pretty interesting and unique building in that it can morph for different size events and different venues, which not all venues can do. So just talk to us a little bit about the building and why it's unique.
Yeah. I know, and a lot of people, like the facility, kind of, people either love it or they hate it, especially around the design aesthetic and the exterior. I personally, again, back to that visionary piece, I love the foresight of the flexibility of the space, because that is the lifeblood of longevity for it. And it's designed to function either as an auditorium or a banquet hall or expo/trade show kind of exhibition space. Regional conferences can be done in the space, but not easily. And it's pretty limited to how much of that you actually can do and meet their needs for breakout rooms and things like that. So in our just seating or normal seating capacity, if we just have seats in the auditorium, the full capacity is 2,072 seats. If we go to an open floor configuration, we can get up to 2,400 people in the room for a concert, depending on how much of that floor space that we open up as standing room only. And then when you're talking about outside, we can flex that space from 3,500 to 8,000 people. Technically, it can hold more than that, but we're comfortable. Redding doesn't have enough hotel rooms for 15,000 people to be here. And then if we're like an expo space, then it's really about 39,000 square feet of exposition space. Banquets, when the floor is completely cleared out, that's just the main floor is around 10,000 square feet of space for bringing in banquet tables and things like that. If we use both floors, we can do about 1,000 people max capacity for banquets.
You touched on the design aesthetic a little bit. I mean, obviously, it is a unique design. Was that concrete architectural style, was that popular in the 70s? Was that an homage to the monolith? Were other facilities and venues being constructed that way during the 70s?
So it is definitely a design aesthetic. It's called brutalism, and it is a design aesthetic that was common in the 50s, 60s, 70s. It started waning actually in the late 70s for public space construction, meaning like it's largely government buildings that were built in the United States in this style, with the exception of a few places like Weir One. There's a library down in around the San Jose Bay area somewhere in there that it's concrete, but then it's supposed to be like a lily or anyway, it's very like, that's a super avant-garde approach on trying to render a flower in a building design. So, but there was also, I think part of the choice was about how that design aesthetic ties into the monolith and those kinds of things. And then when you're looking at it today, this style is actually having a resurgence, because when you're looking at cost over time for the facility, the city of Redding has, including the cost of construction brand new. Now I'm not talking about operational money. I'm just talking about the owner investment in the build and upkeep of the facility. The city of Redding has definitely less than $50 million in for its 53-year existence. But you can't build it new for that dollar. And to build something new at a modern dollar that's going to have the same kind of low demand on a municipality for maintenance and upkeep, a lot of areas are returning to this model because it's actually fun. It's a greener model. It has less gas emissions that come off of it. And then now with modern technologies, you don't have the long-term worries about like, well, what about the pipes in the walls? Or what about this, that, or the other? That were kind of why people got moved away from, because if you had something really go bad, it was hard to access inside to fix things. But with new modern technologies, like this is having a real resurgence, and a lot of places are moving, or a lot of entities are moving back to this type of construction, because it's definitely a lot more cost effective in the long run. Because you can't even burn it down.
Because it's concrete, I mean, does it stay cooler in these hot summer months without having to crank the AC, or not so much?
I mean, not so much. There is definitely a thermodynamic thing that happens both in the colder months and the warmer months. I will say this, I do think it probably lessens the cost overall, that thermodynamic effect of it, but it's 40,000 square feet of space. So, it's expensive to turn the lights on and run heat or AC in this place. But it's a lot of open air that's getting cooled or heated.
Oh, yeah. Now they're 3D printing houses this way, basically. So, I mean, yeah, it definitely is making a comeback. Maybe we can shift gears and talk a little bit about selecting and booking talent, because I think that's a hot topic for the community. It feels like everybody has an opinion about who the Civic should get and who should play at the Civic and how much the ticket prices can be and all of that. So maybe start with, what does the process look like to select and book talent?
Sure. And it is, most of it actually doesn't, it has nothing to do with ours or the community's preferences. That's the first piece of the table I need to set. So the first point of consideration is we only have so much capacity inside. We then only have so much capacity outside. And so what artists are available, that their price point matches that capacity at a value, that's going to mean we're not putting $500 tickets on sale. The famous one I like to use is Metallica, because in the early years we got the, why don't we get Metallica question a lot. Well, Metallica's price is $5 million. And that was 6 years ago. So I guarantee you it's actually probably closer to $10 million today. So 2,300, 2,400 tickets inside. That's some pretty easy math to do. How many people in Redding can afford $2,000 tickets or more to come see Metallica here? Even outside, you take that dollar amount and you divide it by 8,000, our max cap. That's a pretty pricey ticket price, just based on the fee. The thing about when you're booking an artist is it's not just their fees, especially when they're touring. So it's the artist fee, but then they're going to tour with some of their own production, but they're not going to be able to tour with all of it. And so they're going to need us to resource and rent and bring in some of their production to meet their needs. Then, like they're not from here. They don't know what to do. They didn't know today they were going to run out of deodorant. So we have to provide staff to go run errands for them, and then take them places and cater for them and provide food. And sometimes we're paying for hotel rooms, and sometimes we're having to pay different travel expenses on top of it. Then there's the advertising, and then there's the cost of our staff, and there's the cost of turning on the lights, and it's all those things. And so, the first metric is, this is our capacity. So who do we have access to even book with this capacity? And so then from there, it goes into, so touring California is just complicated. It does. I don't care if you are Metallica or if you are Michael Franti, who we just had, or if you're even a lower level artist. It's one shot up the five, with a few little opportunities to go east into Reno or some other place up in Idaho if they go up further. But fundamentally, it's a shot up and down the five. There are only so many venues of a certain size. There's only so many bus drivers available for them. Like that, it's just, there are limited resources up and down the coast. And so I say that to say, okay, so we start with capacity. Price tag wise, who do we have access to? But then it shrinks down from there, who's touring at all? Who's touring the West Coast? Who's going to come further south than Bend? Who's going to go further north than the Bay? Right? So we start out here, but then it very quickly shrinks down. And Hank Williams Jr. is a perfect example of this. He tours all the time. He only comes to the West Coast every 2 to 5 years, because it's just a harder nut to crack for them pulling together a tour on the West Coast. So that's kind of, we start there and then we go down. And then the next considerations are, well, who does Redding like to see? What are Redding's tastes? And, there's some pretty tried and true basics there, but then we learn lessons too, country, comedy, classic rock. Those are the three main categories. But then within that, some of our biggest shows are things that would not have actually slotted into any one of those. Modest Mouse was one of a big learning curve for us, of just how many people are, here that want that kind of music rather than any of those other three categories. So then an offer goes in, and usually we're going in sort of blind. We have a talent buyer who will inquire about an artist and kind of get a framework of we're interested in this artist. What's their price point? Da, 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 da. And then that kind of hones and refines then what the offer is going to look like. But a big part of the matrix that goes into this that is actually then, what do we actually think is the ticket price threshold for this particular patron or this particular artist, right? Because different artists have different demographics, and those demographics have different price sensitivities. And so many times, our talent buyer will go down the rabbit hole of can we make this work? And, we'll fundamentally end up having to just leave it because we can't get to a price point on a ticket price that we think will actually work for the market, because they're just kind of expensive. And the flip side of that, though, is that there are artists who are also very, very sensitive to the pricing thresholds for their fan base. And they'll come in with kind of a high, they want this price, but then they want to dictate to us what the price point would be, that we would actually have to be a sellout just to cover expenses in those kinds of spaces. And that just doesn't, it doesn't make business sense. So we end up having to step back from those. But it's not as simple as just saying, oh, we want to book you too. and then reaching out to you two and say, hey, you two, we'd like you to come to Reading. What are your dates? It's, are they touring? Will they do a fly date? If they are touring, are they touring the West Coast? Can we afford them? What else are they going to bring with them that's going to amp up the price up, and all those things. So yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, I mean, there's such an algorithm to it too. For some of the larger bands or performers that you bring in, do you have to guarantee certain seating capacity or minimum guarantees for them that then you're on the hook to try to sell those seats? Or is it truly whatever you sell kind of, goes towards that bottom line?
Well, so there's an old model that has not been. So there's a way that this used to work way back in the day, when the artists used to tour, and the touring is what they did to sell albums, not what they did to make money. So when that was the model, what you're talking about, where they would just take a percentage of the gate, that was kind of a universal model. So whatever you sold, they took their split, right? But then as the recording industry changed and their revenues from album sales started getting smaller, smaller, and smaller, touring actually is now how they feed themselves. It's how they pay for their families' lives. And so now the model is we actually have to provide them a guarantee. So their price point, there's a minimum guarantee. And then if we get over a certain sales point, then they have the opportunity to participate in what's called the back end. So they get a bonus if we sell over a certain number.
And is there a sweet spot you're looking for when you're booking talent? Like it might depend on the type of show, but is there a sweet spot in that ticket price that you're like, yeah, this is really what our community feels like it hits well?
It's really not that straightforward. It really does kind of depend on the popularity of the artist. Like it's more of a range that we know, a comfort range, but even within that, it will still be very specific to how much value we can assess that artist has for this market, and if that value and what ticket prices that value supports.
I'm curious too, with the ever-changing model and technology, things like Live Nation and Ticketmaster and even streaming music on Spotify and things like that. I mean, how does that affect your day-to-day and how you're securing these artists and really planning for success?
It impacts it pretty significantly. It's a push me, pull me, right? Like we have artists that we 100% lost out on getting because they just got booked for a whole Live Nation tour. That being said, we also have several acts that they're here on a Live Nation tour, but we managed to buy this date off of the tour, if that makes sense. And we didn't go in intending or knowing that we were doing that. It's just it's just for that tour, for their needs, for how they're routing, for what they're doing. Adding a date in Reading made sense for them. And that is fundamentally the perpetual conversation that we're working to have with the agents. It is specific about that offer, but then it's also many times we won't necessarily book the artist that we put a specific art offer in on, but then that will spark a conversation or keep us in the conversation for this other artist that's similar, that then the agent will come back and say, hey, like this one, what about this? Would you be willing to put in an offer on this artist? And then we'll go through that whole algorithm of assessment again on something that they've suggested. So the Live Nation piece is really kind of a push me, pull me. They are the dog that is wagging the tail. They're the biggest beast in the industry around the world. And where Live Nation goes, the rest of us fundamentally will end up going there. 2 years ago, Michael Rapino sat down for a 2-hour podcast where he said they were 100% in on all-in pricing, which I'm also a fan of. But I knew when that came out, like, oh, this is going to be interesting to see how this plays out on the all-in pricing. And then California this last year passed legislation to where now every venue in California is having to do all-in pricing, which fundamentally I think is in the patron's best interest. And it also diminishes scalping activity, or it makes it more evident that you're on a scalper's site when you have to do all-in pricing.
Maybe you could just describe what all-in pricing is for somebody who might not know what that is.
Right. So all-in pricing, that's the base ticket price plus all of the fees that are on top, which again, we don't dictate much of that. Most of that's getting dictated in other ways. The only thing that is not included for all-in pricing is sales tax and any like mailing if somebody's wanting their tickets mailed to them. Because we're a nonprofit organization, there is no sales tax on our ticket sales, but at other venues in California, they would still potentially see sales tax on top. So there's it. It's a benefit and it's also a bummer because it's like all big box business, right? Like there's still a desperate need for the local mom and pop or for a regional homegrown entity, but then the game gets so skewed to the benefit of the big box that it's harder and harder to compete, honestly, So that's part of the puzzle.
Well, and for competitors specifically, I'm trying to think. I mean, is it mainly venues in Sacramento and Medford, or maybe some casino along the I-5 corridor within our Redding or greater Redding market? Who are the competitors that you're kind of competing against?
So our most direct competitors are actually the 6 casinos between here and Sacramento, or even in Sacramento, that are between Medford and the Bay. And it's not necessarily that they're competitors because they're casinos. It's just there's more of them, right? So at any given time, any offer that we have on the table, there's somewhere between 2 to 6 casinos that are also offering on those same artists. The casino model is completely different than our model. Our model is what the industry calls a hard ticket, meaning the artist compensation is globally tied to ticket sales. Even though there's a baseline guarantee, there's still with that opportunity for a back end. That's still tied to hard ticket sales. We are competing with 6 casinos directly, but we're also it's about competing sometimes is when we're talking, it's more like Bend, Medford, and then Sacramento and the Bay. So like you asked me about capacity earlier, we are the largest indoor venue and the largest outdoor venue that is not a casino between Sacramento and the Bay and Bend and possibly even into Eugene as far as like inside capacity goes. So we have a real unique opportunity to serve the touring industry from our little spot here in Redding. So a big part of the puzzle is about how are we globally able to meet their need, right? Because the more we're a solution for them, that's not just about a price tag on an artist, but it's a global solution that actually increases our opportunities to get higher quality acts in for a competitive price.
And Julie, with regard to the folks who are attending these performances, what percentage are from Redding and kind of Shasta County versus from outside areas, maybe coming to this venue to see that artist specifically?
Yeah. So our average, what we call outside attender, we calculate from outside of an hour's radius to differentiate because our things are at night. There's usually alcohol happening and maybe not everybody is staying, but we also know that there's actually a pretty significant portion of the local population that then rents a hotel room for the night because they can just walk across the lawn and go climb in bed rather than, dangerously drive themselves home. So we calculate from an hour out and it's pretty steady. 36% of the business is coming from more than an hour away. The bigger the name, the higher that percentage goes. So the highest one that we saw last year was for Steve Miller Band. And that was 46% of those attendees was from more than an hour away. But we even we had Lord Huron in last year. There was a family from Sweden, family of 7, that when the tour announced, they were like, "Where's Redding?" And then they planned a full 7-day vacation for their entire family here around that concert date. And, so we do definitely get some of those tourism dynamics coming in. The tried and true patron is still, mostly a local patron base, but any of those things, the more we get on those like big national tour announcers, like getting in when they're announcing the whole tour, increases the odds of something like that happening, right? Where they're like, oh, actually, I could go see them at this fun little venue that's maybe even smaller than one of the other venues, have a more intimate experience, see someplace I've never been before, and, make it a 2 or 3 day excursion rather than just driving in for the show.
And you've dropped quite a few names already, but I'm curious just to find out from your perspective, what are some bigger name talent that you've gotten recently that you just think was such a big win, a big score for Reading?
Steve Miller Band last summer is probably the Steve Miller Band is big for a variety of reasons. Number one, just like he's at that iconic level of success in his career, right? Like Reading getting Steve Miller Band at all ever for any price is actually it's a pretty big deal. He did not have to come play Reading if he didn't want to. He could look plenty busy other ways, other places. And then he was just so good. He still sounds exactly the same as he has always sounded his entire career. And we got 2 full hours with just like it wasn't 2 hours of a 4-band lineup. It was 2 hours of Steve Miller Band. Like that was just legendary on a lot of realms for us. And then he was also like one of the most expensive artists. Like as a singular artist, that's the highest price tag that we have paid for. We paid close to that for packages or for more than one, but not on the one. So that was a big deal. That was a big get. We had been trying to get him since I think 2017 and could not make it work because inside is too small for his price. And then the outside stuff is more expensive. So it's actually riskier for us. But then, like I was saying earlier, post-COVID, it was like, well, the industry is only focused on venues with a capacity really of 5,000 and above. And so if we want to stay in the conversation, we've got to activate that space. And so that's actually really how we got here is what was the industry interested in even putting on tour post-COVID, and then how does CAP play into that?
Julie, I'm really fascinated by the scheduling of these. I'm assuming that you're scheduling, a year plus out for some of these performances. No, you're shaking your head not.
Oh, we wish.
So maybe that's the question. I guess how far out are you scheduling performances? But also too, I mean, when you look at an artist like Steve Miller Band, where yes, it's expensive, but I'm assuming that you can assume that it will be a sellout. Like how, I guess, in that algorithm, how does it work? Are you purely going for ticket sales when you're booking these? Or are you saying, okay, we have a Steve Miller Band where we know that will be a great performance and a sellout. Maybe we'll also schedule a different genre that may not be as popular with the masses, but will cater to a different audience.
I mean, it kind of goes back to the thing about like what we even have available to us. Like there were no Steve Millers available this year. So we don't have a Steve Miller Band equivalent this year. But then on the booking, how far out? Today's a good example. Tim Allen went on public on sale today. He's coming in September. That is the second shortest window. The shortest window that we've ever had was Jerry Seinfeld last year. We had 33 days from announce to him in the building. And when I say announce, like when you're talking about stuff like that, like we're finding out the week before that they want to do this and it's coming together really fast. Because those are both rentals. So like maybe not a direct corollary, but our booking window for touring entertainment, the collective of whatever that means, because there are different windows for different types of genres. So like performing arts actually has a longer window. But then when you get into concerts, that's a shorter window. If we get 90 days, we feel like we've won the lottery. And many times we don't even get that. If we get more than that, we're like, oh my gosh, what is even happening right now? But then like for comedy can be a much shorter window. The shortest concert window we've ever had was 43 days, a couple of summers ago. So it can really, a lot of it just ends up, it has to do with what's going on in their world. And our job is to be skillfully reactive to what's going on in their world. We stay engaged to influence the conversation for our community's benefit, but we're never dictating. never, not one time are we setting the term. So when we put in an offer, it's always like a mutually agreeable date. So then that way that offer stays alive, even if they're not doing this and they're not doing that, right? It's still there. It's never going to get put away in a this is dead file. It's not specific to a specific tour. It's like when it works for you and it works for us, we would like to do this. But then from like Steve Miller Band's a good example of this. Like I said, we started trying to get him in 2017, and then we got him here in 2023. What's another big one? Corn, when that came in several years ago, that was 7 years of work from the time that we first started putting in offers to getting them in the space. And so that's what I mean. Like the offer process can be long and arduous because of all of the complexities around touring and finding the spot where we actually fit for them.
And I want to talk about the shows that are happening out on the Civic lawn, because it feels like there's been more of those recently, and I could be wrong. And I want to talk about that. But what's the process behind figuring out which space is good for which artist? Does the artist say, we want an outdoor show? Or do you, as the Civic Advanced Redding, say, we would want to put you out as an outside show? Like, how does that process work?
And it's a little bit of both. But most of it, again, comes back to the value of the artist, their price tag, and how many tickets we think we can sell. There are some, like a Steve Miller Band, that is only ever an outside discussion because their price tag is too high and they're too valuable. Like there's more people than that want to come to that than what we can fit inside. But then we had one this summer who they very specifically were like, we're only asking about the outdoor space if you're going to put in an offer on that. So, but again, we still go through the process of then weighing and valuing whether or not we think it's worth the risk. Because the outside always means a higher dollar value. Because the one thing I didn't say earlier, that artist price tag is tied to room capacity. So they will have scales of pricing. For this capacity, this is the price. For that capacity, that's the price. And then some of them, many of them, which are the more valuable artists for our market or any market, because they won't take anything less than this. Or it doesn't matter if your capacity is, let's say their minimum guarantee is more usable to 5,000 cap space. Just because you're at 2,400 cap space, they are not going to take less than what they charge the 5,000 cap space. They're saying this is the minimum I'm willing to be paid to go to work. And so then, so into those dynamics.
Julie, switching gears a little bit, I've heard stories of some artists and their writers and requesting very specific things. And maybe without throwing any artists under the proverbial bus, do you have any fun or crazy stories around maybe some artists and things like that you can talk about on this podcast?
We have some fun comedians who are very specific about wooden coat hangers, or they get very particular about the brand of kombucha, or the this or the that. And it actually has a terminology in the business, and everybody thinks about it being around an artist being difficult or being a diva. The Green M&M Mariah Carey story, it's the famous one everybody references. It's actually it's not coming from the artist. It's coming from the tour manager. It's called the tour manager's pimp. And what they mean by that is they put something ridiculous in the writer so that they can come in and like that. They know if it's been read and if it's been executed on. Because if you put their 6 wooden coat hangers on the coat rack, they don't have to worry today. They're not going to have to be writing hard on people. And that is a point that it's part of how we gotten to the success that we have is because we take very good care of artists. That's another big factor for a market like Redding is, do they want to play it? Number one. And then number two, if they do come play it, because for the more valuable artists, this is what's called an underplay. Like they could play a bigger date somewhere else for more money. But there are a lot of reasons why they might decide to do an underplay. And so if they're going to underplay in a market like Redding, what are their reasons? But then also, are they going to be taken good care of? And we've developed a stellar reputation within the industry on how well we take care of artists when they're here. And we go over and above and beyond trying to meet all of those qualifications for them and to meet their needs. Because, like I said earlier, I didn't know I was going to run out of deodorant on Thursday. And but I know where to go to the store to go get it. Like, that's a whole tour of like our next big show coming up, Dirty Heads and Slightly Stupid. That's 100 people on tour that they don't know where the grocery store is, and they don't know today that they're going to run out of deodorant 2 weeks from now. They're not thinking like that, right? So our job is to not just even the artist, but the whole tour crew that's touring with them, of making sure we create an environment, a space for them that's easy. We get the compliment a lot that you made a work day feel like an off day. So that's the goal that we're going for all the time, to make the whole process just seamless for them, because we actually get graded. All of the tour managers have to report back, and they report back on how well the production crew went, how good was catering, how did settlement go, how was security run, they report back on all of the logistical pieces, and it lives out there for them to decide whether or not they want to say yes.
Maybe on the other side of Steve's question, then, if you can talk about it, have you had any artists that just had an amazing time in Redding and were kind of shocked that they had such a good time in Redding?
So Joe Coy loves playing our room. He loves it, even though he plays big stadiums in Hawaii and other places. So he loves it. Every time he's here, I love this place. So he's one. Let's see. Last year, there was Falling in Reverse and Ice Nine Kills. The tour manager for Ice Nine Kills could not stop talking about how amazing we were, how amazing the crowd was. Our crowds are fantastic. They're noisy, and the bands love that. And Steve Miller Band's tour manager was like, you guys are pros, and it shows. They usually come in at the start of the day a little skeptical, because it's a smaller town for a lot of these guys. And so anytime we get to the end of the day, I'm not having to ask. It's just an automatic, this was such a good day and took such good care of us, that then I know we hit the mark. And that it's actually more common for us to get that than it is to not get that.
Well, and that's a testament to you and your team, no doubt. I guess I don't really know on that rider front, if your staff does not meet some of those requirements in the rider, what are the repercussions at that point?
Well, that's a very good question. So because the rider actually covers a lot of things, some of it's production wise, some of it's then catering and hospitality. And it's also kind of a wish list, right? So they put out there like what their dreams are. And then we have to scale it back to what we can actually deliver. So we go through a process that's called advancing. And that's basically the back and forth with, okay, this is what you've asked for. This is how we can or cannot execute that physically in the space. Or sometimes it's a straight up hard negotiation, because it's something that's really critical, especially on the production side. That tends to be where it's more of a really hard coded, this is an up or down. And if we can't deliver, we actually risk losing out on the show. And by losing out on the show at that point, that would mean risking having to still pay them their fee, but they're not going to play the date. So like that kind of stuff, there's really critical that it gets handled well. And so far, so good.
So I know you've got a lot of great things coming up. I mean, I feel like it's been a great summer for the Civic. Talk to us a little bit about some of the shows that are coming up, and kind of where you mentioned it previously that Bethel is no longer in the building. I think that opens up a lot more dates for you to use. So what does that future look like? What makes you excited about the next, seasons to come?
Yeah. Well, first, the first thing, literally anybody listening, you have to come to the Dirty Heads and Slightly Stupid concert. I don't care if you like reggae or not. I don't care if it's your jam. This is the biggest production that has ever been on the lawn. The stage is 80 feet wide. It is going to be a show. And so people just need to come. It's going to be a great time. It's going to be great weather. You're not going to want to miss it. So it's not only is it our biggest show of the summer outdoor season, it's actually really the largest outdoor show that has ever been on this lawn, as far as just what the bands are bringing. It's going to be really fantastic. And then like I mentioned Tim Allen earlier. So he's coming in September. That's amazing. We've been trying to get Tim Allen in for a long time. We have a lot of things. We have Mannheim Steamroller is another one that we have been trying for years to get in, and we were always blocked by a BSSM date. And so now we're able to get them into the room. So that's super fun. And really the biggest, probably, like, nobody knew, right? Until we did it, until we had an end date, nobody knew what the transition was going to be, how herky jerky or volatile the transition from, because it's kind of a switch, right? They occupy around 130 days a year. And so that's a certain volume that just, boom, and it's gone. And how long will it take us to ramp up to filling that volume back up? The fun part is by the end of May, we had already surpassed the number of events booked out, like far enough in the process that we knew they were going to actually happen. Than we did the entire 12 months before. So that's the nice part is it's not looking like we're going to have, barring economy transition, like there's a whole bunch of things that are just completely outside of our control. But from the short window of the future that we have right now, like we're going to be able to fill that volume up. It's a more volatile volume than the steady eddy of, a certain amount of rent coming in every month, but that's just part of what it is now. Like September alone, we have eight events. I don't know that we've ever had a month with that many events in a singular month. We have one in the next 3 months. We have one 8-week window that we have 12 events happening in that same time frame. And so it's thrilling and exciting, and it's good. It's also a completely different workflow than having Bethel in this space. So it's growing pains a little bit on what that rhythm looks like now, but it's exciting. We didn't know. Nobody knew till there was calendar. So how it was going to go. And so far, it's going pretty good.
Awesome. That sounds super.
Yeah.
And Julie, is the best place for folks to both purchase tickets for those shows you mentioned, as well as kind of stay apprised of what's coming, just to go to the Redding Civic Auditorium website?
Yes. Always go to www.reddingcivic.com. Any other website is a scalper site, and they are selling you, at worst case, and at best case scenario, they're selling you outrageously priced tickets that you could get cheaper by buying direct from us. Worst case scenario, they're selling you a straight up fraudulent ticket. It's not real, and it's not going to get you in the door. So www.reddingcivic.com. That's where all of the pertinent information lives, and you won't be snookered out of more money.
And how often does that happen?
Every show.
Really?
It's so bad. We do all of the things. There's all kinds of strategies that we deploy to diminish that kind of activity. But the professional scalping, people that have made an actual business out of this, what they've done is they've developed software bots that go out and they're actually trying to buy the tickets, and they're trying to get into your system to hold tickets while they're trying to sell them on the live market. So they're not committing to a ticket sale on this side until they actually have a sale on the other side. It's almost like the stock market, right? It's like they're trying to do it real time. We've actually managed to successfully diminish the bot activity. So, but that doesn't, like Steve Miller Band is another example. The day that we announced Steve Miller Band, they put up, all the scalper sites put up tickets for indoor seats. This was never an indoor show. Like, these were straight up fraudulent tickets. And we had people show up with tickets that were never, not one time purchased. They were not valid tickets. So if those people would try to deploy that same kind of brain power towards good, we would have a lot of problems solved in our world today. But, crooks are crooks, and that's what they are. They're they're not just stealing from the patron in my eyes, and it does feel like stealing to me, because they try to present themselves as the venue in order to deceive people into spending more money. But they're also stealing from artists, because those extra dollars that fan paid to see that person, that's not getting to the artist. That's just going into the scalper's pocket. The band's still getting paid the same dollar off the ticket that I was already paying them. So
I'm curious, you mentioned Advanced Redding as a nonprofit. How does that, I guess, how common is that model within kind of the venue world, have a nonprofit run a venue? And because of your nonprofit status, are you focused on different things than dollars, I guess, or do those dollars go back into the facility? I guess, how does that work compared to maybe a for-profit entity running a facility?
nonprofits managing venues isn't totally unheard of, but where it happens is when a municipality owns a true performing arts center. So that is the normal spot that a nonprofit management entity could be there. And usually that's because they're a presenting house, meaning like they're developing their own work and they're hiring actors and they're doing those kinds of things. In For a multi-purpose venue like ours, we are a unicorn. That model is a for-profit operator that has a service contract with the municipality, meaning the municipality pays them a fee. It covers their overhead plus operational costs to provide the service of management to the community. So we are very definitely outside the norms, and the fact that we're a nonprofit. And then we're extra outside the norms in that we don't get any kind of financial payment or consideration or things like that from the municipality who owns the facility. We're paying rent and all those things, and because we're a leasee, we own operational obligations that a normal venue, for-profit venue operator would not, like, because they're never not one time going to be on the hook for, I'm clogging a toilet. That's still going to be that city's, responsibility. They're never one time going to have to worry about any kind of maintenance or any of that kind of thing. They're literally just there to book the space and execute events, period. And then the municipality owns the rest of that. So anyway, so we're very unique in our structure is the short answer. And then advantages, disadvantages. I don't. It all goes. We run it very much like we have to watch the bottom line. All nonprofits do. So like operationally, it doesn't affect how we do what we do, and in fact, in some ways, it probably hinders what we can do because we're not just weighing the potential the profitability of something, right? And a for-profit entity doesn't have, like they have shareholders or an ownership responsibility, but that is a little more freewheeling on decision-making processes versus we're a nonprofit with a governing board. And we, even though we don't have an operating agreement as the leasing, we very much take the responsibility of not creating something that then becomes problematic for our landlord, the city of Redding, very seriously. So in all respect, the model probably actually handicaps us in some ways, not terminally, but it definitely, it's not as a normal agreement. Those operators would literally just make decisions that they thought that were best, and those contracts get written in a way to where then the city just is left holding the bag, the plus or the minus of however that goes, right? so it has some constraints, but I also think that's fundamentally been better for the community, so that there wasn't somebody just rushing ahead without taking into consideration the impacts back onto the city if they didn't make the right choices.
But when you're securing artists, you don't have to vet those artists through the city or through your board. And I mean, your group can run with whatever you feel is best.
Yeah, exactly.
What is something that you wish the community knew about either Advanced Redding or the Civic Auditorium, or both, one for both,
Well, I mentioned one already, which is the facility is owned by the city of Redding. It has always been owned by the city of Redding. That has never not been true. So that's number one. And then the second one probably would be just um, that Advanced Reading is not Bethel. I mentioned earlier that, we were kind of birthed out of a creative idea from within the Bethel environment, but our board isn't even a majority of Bethel people. It's other people from they don't go to the same church. They're not Bethel employees. So that while there has been, that's kind of Bethel influence that some members of the community seem as bad, it was also what made it happen in those early years, right? So without that dynamic, none of us would be here. None of this would be happening. The conversation was shutter it or tear it down. But they have actually been people of their word. We're still here, even though they're not going to be back in September. And so, this concept of like Bethel controlling what happened in the facility. Just go look at the last few years of our history of what we have hosted or booked directly ourselves. If any church was dictating what was or was not happening in the space, there are many, many, many those experiences that would not have been happening here. So that has never been the truth. They don't dictate and have never dictated what we put on sale for people to come see. So then that'll take some time for that myth to get dispelled. And for some people, it can't be dispelled, and that's okay. And the proof will be in the pudding. Like we've shown what the truth is, and people either want to accept that or they don't.
And Julia, so it sounds like since Advanced Reading came on in 2012, there's been this upward trajectory for the facility and the venue. What does the future look like for the Redding Civic Auditorium?
I mean, I think long arc, it really is going to come down to what happens after we finish the specific plan, the Reading Riverfront specific plan process. Like that is not a development conversation. That is just a zoning, permitting, it's just a governing document that says this is what we would like to focus on for these areas and what we like generally in big broad strokes, what we will say yes to and what we won't say yes to as a community, not even Advanced Reading. That's a community level discussion. And ultimately, when it's finished, it's the city council that's seated at that time that will vote on it and say, yes, this is where we're going. The long arc conversation is really around like, what do we want to do? There's a lot of opportunity that could happen. It needs to be reasonable. It needs to be anchored in reality, not high hopes and dreams. We don't need a 15,000 seat anything, right? Not a sporting complex, not a concert venue like that's outsized for who and what Redding is, or even what Redding can support, or the whole northern region. And so once we complete the riverfront specific plan, and then we start moving into, well, then is there a development master plan discussion that can happen after that? That's when it starts getting interesting. Because until that conversation is settled one way or another, yes, no, everybody's kind of in a holding pattern of trying to keep the activity at a certain pace and filling the needs of the community. But there does come a point where HVAC systems have to get replaced. Other kinds of infrastructure have to get at least repaired, if not something else done. So there's just a broader conversation around like, are we either a community who's going to reinvest in the assets that we have and go forward with what we have as we have? Or are we going to pursue something else that not only takes care of this, but then also kind of levels the whole thing up a reasonable notch? And do I think that reality somewhere out there with whatever were to happen with the development conversation is achievable? I do. I would not be here doing this work if I did not think there's more available for Redding if we had the capacity to meet that need. But we have to invest in having the capacity to meet those needs. That's why the Sphere is happening in Vegas. That's why Golden One Center, when it opened its doors, it was the most technologically advanced venue in the world. And now it's the Sphere, so there's a real economy around the hospitality industry as a whole. Entertainment and what we do at the venue is just one leg of that kind of ecosystem. Redding has all of the materials that it needs to have one of the best hospitality economies in the world. It truly does. We have the raw ingredients of just really great, friendly, hospitable people. That's who we are as a community. And then on top of that, we're already a big retail center. We're already doing all of these things. And so it really, to me, it's very, on an economy front, it's kind of the low hanging fruit. If we invest in figuring out really the full metrics of what this is and then how to capitalize on it better, it just benefits everybody.